I'm in touch with him 4 or 5 times a week.
Yeah.
And I, once in a while, I talk about basketball and see some small thing I noticed or something I noticed, and he'll either dialogue with me about it or not. And if he dialogues with me, then sometimes he implements it. If he doesn't dialogue, it's just a thought that goes to the wayside.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's something, seeing him, and he handles it so well.
Yeah.
He was the youngest of 9 children, doesn't expect to be front and center. And he's a great team person, great team player, great personality. Doesn't play mind games with the player. Really works at it. Smart guy.
Yeah,
and that's been quite.
That was such a team's team, like a basketball coach's dream, wasn't it? They came together and they had no role players. Was that the case in the NBL? When you're getting players from America, they come down and they're superstars. They're in the media. They look different. They're obviously in peak shape, and girls could be a distraction and that kind of stuff. Do you have any memories of players in the NBL who came down and it's just, party time? You got to settle down, Andre Lafleur or something like that?
I think that there were a few players that were sent home. I think only one of mine was. But I think they all had adjustment problems. I think the Australian players were making a sacrifice, trying to accept it. And they were getting, this was back in the 80s, they were getting all the headlines and dominating the stats. So it took a lot of character on the part of the local players to accept them and then blend in and eventually develop some chemistry. And the ones that were able to do that developed themselves, and those Australian players were really a link for future Australian players to step up and play even a larger role in the NBL. So I think it was rough. The Melbourne Tigers, with Lindsay, he did not like the NBL idea at all for a few years. Melbourne had been the hot spot of the capital of Australian basketball, and those clubs really didn't have to do any work to get American players that were there that worked teachers, and then they were just in Melbourne, and until the NBL came along, and then it took a step toward professionalism, even though it wasn't professional, and it was important that the Melbourne clubs bought in eventually, and that the Tigers bought in especially, and as I said, they did quite well once they did. There was adjustments, and most of these guys I sent down there were Black American players, and there was another issue. I think that they all had their experiences. They all felt some rejection and maybe even some racism at times. Families, the same thing. Kids going into their schools, their wives, if a player would bring his wife for fitting in and so on. And so it was those players in the 80s not only brought the basketball along, but they also, I think, culturally, you take these, but there was naturally tension, naturally jealousy, and naturally racism in some areas, in some corners, no question. I know of those personally. I know that Trish Bruton, she's quite an amazing woman, and she had those 3 boys, kids. They were elementary school, and they were going to school, and they were taking some stuff at school, and she was propping them up and educating them. And I don't know. I guess if I was going to put someone in charge of racial relations in Australia, it would be C.J. Bruton and Trish Bruton, and Austin Bruton, Elliot, Cal. They have really reached out and done quite well. But it's not. This is not a knock on Australia. This is life. When people are different, people react differently. But overall, I think that these players got great opportunities in the NBL. I think they grasped the opportunities and did quite well with them. They made a contribution. Many are given back as far as coaching is concerned. Kurt Forrester was with Sydney in the early days, I know as a high school coach. I think Ricky Grace has developed a mentoring program for Aboriginal girls. Cal Bruton has his own basketball company that he goes out and instructs and works with young players. I think Kat Dufelmeyer does that too. He played with Canberra. So there's a lot of them giving back, and I think they call Australia their home.
Absolutely.
I think it's worked out. There are rough patches along the way, but overall, I don't see anybody leaving.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, and I was saying that you hit the nail on the head there. It's bigger than basketball, and these are young men that you're finding at 20 that have skills, and then come down and come somewhere in Australia that would be challenging. It is a parochial place. There is small town mentality in places. Our neighbours are Antarctica, and so it is quite far away. But they're coming from. If you come from New York down to here, you've got like a certain swagger and a certain cool about you. But I think when you get in touch with the different cultures down here, particularly our First Nations and Indigenous people, basketball was a huge thing in the 90s, and these players see an opportunity to help through basketball to teach skills, to teach teamwork, to maybe give people an opportunity to get out of less than optimal living conditions or conditions to raise children. So I think, and the guys you mentioned, Cal Bruton has the Black Pearl program, which has been fantastic. He's the OG. If I go out and do a documentary in the country, a small country town in far north Western Australia, you're standing there, there's about 10 people in the town, but you're at the bakery waiting for like a pie or something, and I'm reading the newspaper from the 82, Cal Bruton's been there shaking hands with the mayor playing basketball. It's a faded little bit of newspaper. He's been all around Australia. LeRoy Loggins has something, and Jerry Rucker has clinics. You have changed the landscape of Australian basketball by just introducing these young men. Is that something that was foreseeable, or is like a happy outcome?
I don't think there was really much thought given to that. I was with Cal the year that he was in Brisbane, his first year, and then he went to Geelong and eventually came back to Brisbane. But Cal was cautious. He handled everything so well, and he was a great PR guy. But in his heart, I know he was probably had a few disappointments. He came to me one time and asked me if I would take him to get a haircut because he was concerned about that. And I went to a barber down at the old, I think he was a Czechoslovakian, and he was in his 60s or 70s, and he had a one-chair shop. And I always went to him, and I took Cal down there and introduced him, and he was just elated to have Cal. He got his autograph afterwards, and it was quite a nice event for everybody. But there's bad people everywhere, and there's going to be people causing trouble, whether it's racially or not, and that goes for everywhere. But I'd say, in general, bottom line, when I look back on the players I've sent, that I didn't make perfect selections, and nobody's perfect. But these guys overall, I'd give them a grade A for the work they've done in basketball, the work they've done in promoting basketball, and just in general the way they've conducted their lives while in Australia.
Absolutely.
I'm just really, really proud of the way that has worked out, and I know my influence with most of them pretty much ended once I got them under a contract down there and got them playing. But that's all they wanted. They didn't want a lifetime relationship with me, but they wanted to play basketball, and I was able to do that. But I like and respect every one of them. Cal and I have had our differences from time to time along the line, but front and center is what he's done down there as a basketball player and as a representative of his country and his race and so on. And I have to mention C.J. Bruton too. Jay came to Iowa when he was 20 years old, and I was able to arrange a scholarship for him in a junior college, 2-year college that played extremely good basketball and had NBA graduates and so on. And he was a skinny little kid, and he had to adjust in a way, and it wasn't easy for him. But he took that team, and they were just a bunch of individuals jumping high and yelling for the ball all the time, and he made the extra pass, and he disciplined them, and they went on and won a championship, won the national championship.
Yeah.
And so he did a sensational. C.J. Bruton is a most unique player. He is really team first, and he's got his 6 titles, and no one is close to it that I know of. But I think Trish Bruton had a big influence on C.J. when he was really young. I recall when he was getting ready to go for games, she'd pull him aside and say, "Don't hog the ball and make your free throws."
Yeah.
That was a mother.
You gotta listen to mama. Yeah, you gotta listen to mama.
I think he took that to heart.
Yeah. Now,
my main, the guys I said mainly were in the 80s, but it trickled into the 90s too. My relationship with the players in the club in the 90s was much different from the 80s. In the 90s, or rather in the 80s, I knew everybody. Everybody knew me. It was on a first-name basis. It was Terry Ryan at Brisbane. It was Mal Simpson at Adelaide. It was Mike Rabuski in Sydney. I knew all these guys, and they trusted me, and I trusted them, and we worked things out. But then they move on, time changes, and we get some people in there that I don't know. And then also, we've got other people that are getting active in overseas development or overseas placement. I virtually didn't have any competition in the 80s, and that became more of a technological thing. People, say, young lawyers who aspire to be an agent had their fax machine, and they had long lists of players they were sending to the clubs without any personal contact or whatever with. And I got stung a couple times on that, but I still got some good players into Australia in the 90s. Rayos was one. Elliot Hatcher was another one. Elliot Hatcher was a very good player at Illawarra.
Yep.
Rayos played mainly for Townsville. And then Clarence Tyson's another good player. Derek Rucker's another good player.
Oh, yeah. Derek Rucker's all time. All time, absolutely. Yeah. Now, a big part of NBL Rewind is getting stories that haven't been really told because the social media wasn't the same. The media coverage, like you said, wasn't the same back in the day. And I think the players could there's a lot of funny stories that have been told. So that's pretty much the whole reason we started up this NBL Rewind thing. Do you have any funny stories about players that you'd like to tell that might not have been told, or they could be well-worn stories? It can be name and shames. It can be embarrassing. It can just be funny stories. Is there anything that you want to bring to light?
I don't know how humorous they are. I could kind of go down the line. I've got them up here and just give a word or two on everyone that I did recruit. Cal, of course, was, as I said, I saw him at the NBA camp, and at the time, Cal, the story has been told many times in Australia, was driving a trash truck, and Trish was working in the office, and she was the one that was designating where his pickups were. He got 35 cents a pickup when he got that offer. Just supposedly, he told me he just drove the trash truck, stopped where he was, and got out, went back to the suitcase. Steve Carfino was through away. Jim Rosborough was been very loyal to me through the years as far as players are concerned. Had lunch with Steve in Iowa City, and I tell you an interesting story about that. I was looking at Steve, and I was looking at another player at Iowa State, a guy named Lefty Moore, who was also a very talented point guard. And there was one other in the mix there, and so I wasn't really sure who I was going to take. This was for myself, coach. And in Des Moines one morning, I had a meeting with somebody downtown early, and we had breakfast at the Marriott Hotel, and I was walking from the Marriott Hotel 2 or 3 blocks back to my car, And I looked up the sidewalk and I saw this big guy walk along. And it was Steve Waite. And Steve Waite